But, as I've said, you are an avid student of and commentator on culture and current events. The world's eyes are on America at the moment. To begin with, can I ask you, what are the key things that you are paying attention to in your country's fever pitch journey towards the presidential election?
Well, as we're thinking about an election in a society of ordered liberty, an election is an X-ray, a diagnostic test of the people of the electorate, and so we're about to find out how Americans think, and in one sense, whether they're thinking as we come to the November 3rd election. But huge issues are on the line for us. Basically, every branch of government is now on the line in our constitutional system. And that's been underlined for us as if we needed any reminder with a vacancy on the Supreme Court and a presidential nomination to the nation's highest court, reminding us of the role of the president, amongst other things, in making that kind of nomination. And so issues of life and death, of truth and whether or not we can know what's true, of the meaning of text, and whether we're bound together as a covenant nation by a constitutional agreement, or whether we are just a part of a giant progressivist experiment that is now without controls. The stakes are really that high, and so we're about to find out whether we believe in ordered liberty and the prerequisites to ordered liberty, or whether we're just going to give ourselves over to a revolution. And unfortunately, we know how most of those end.
Well, that's a clear perspective on the issues at stake. Can I ask about the deep polarisation in American society today? We see it in every Western nation. You saw it in Britain with Brexit. We see it in Australia, perhaps not to the same extent, but it's certainly there. But I think even avid admirers of America, and I'm one of them, are staggered at the level of division in America, and we wonder whether there's any chance of healing, no matter what happens on November 4, some sort of recognition again of the need to end the atomisation and start to find some ways back to talking to one another.
Well, that's going to be very necessary, but I think the polarization is something that does require some explanation. If you look at American society, and I recognize there are parallels in Australia and especially in the UK. As you look at the 20th century, there was an enormous unity that was created by the emergence of these democracies. I'll use that term in general, into the 20th century, when there was this enormous transformation of political systems. I mean, within a period of about 20 years, most of the monarchies, certainly the absolute monarchies of Europe, had fallen, and in the United States, there was this sense of vast national purpose and leadership in the world. But then we had common enemies in two horrifying world wars, and then in a long Cold War. And so, there was a major fringe figure in American politics in the 1960s who used to say there isn't a dime's worth of difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. And he wasn't wrong. I often will show the platforms of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party from 1960 to students, and I'll white out the names of the parties. Tell me which is which. You have to be a real insider to know which is which. But by the time you get to the late years of the 20th century and now in the 21st century, you've got two different logics working out. You've got two different trajectories, two different visions of America, two different visions of the good life, two different understandings of reality. And they're now encapsulated in these two political parties as two arguments. And every passing election, the division grows greater. So you raised the right issue, about the future. And every one of us is very concerned about that. But at the very least, an election like this is clarifying because it tells us this is how far apart Americans are. And it's issues of life, issues of gender, issues of sexuality, but it's even more fundamental, just issues of reality and what the good life is, what human purpose is, what human beings are worth. All this is very much now on the line.
Yeah, well, it seems common to the West, so it's trite to say it, but it's almost as though amongst the many enemies that the West now faces, the most powerful are in fact internal.
I think we can see in retrospect that a lot of this was visible in the 20th century, but the boundaries of the politically possible during the 20th century were largely conscribed by such realities as the Cold War and the threat of the Soviet Union. And once that was removed, it's as if the lid is off and everything can boil now.
Yeah. Well, to come to a quote from The Gathering Storm, you said that our age is the outcome of years of secularization. Now, that's a word that is not well understood. Ambiguity in language seems to be the postmodernist's best friend. So, firstly, I think I'd love to hear what you think secularization is and what it's done to the influence of religion in society. And then secondly, has secularization seen religion decline, or is it more accurate to say that Christianity is being replaced by other religions and worldviews? But firstly, what do you see as secularization and what it's done to the influence of traditional beliefs?
That's a great question, and I want to be careful with words as you also respect words. And so, in a recent book project I just finished, the manuscript days ago, I argue that the best way to understand secularization is the culture's loss of the binding authority of theism. So it's not as if everything you might define as religious disappears. It's not as if Christians are thrown into jail and Orthodox Jews and Muslims. It's that the society itself recognizes no binding authority of theism. And as you well know, our entire civilizational project has been based on the assumption of theism, and not just some kind of vague theism, but historically upon biblical theism, upon Christianity. And I in the book you cite there, my most recent published work, The Gathering Storm, I talk about the fact that we are now living on borrowed capital. So what we've discovered is that for the last 200 or 300 years, Western culture has been kind of resting on a melting iceberg, but it's been a long melt, and we're living on the borrowed capital of an inherited Christianity that's now denied. So what we're seeing is the inevitable result in a secular age of the fact that people really don't believe there's anything beyond what they see. They're increasingly just materialists and naturalists, and so there's no transcendent norm. There's no binding authority. So, John, if I may say this, it comes down to whether or not marriage is something that is a given, for example, or if it's just a human artifact that we can, change or transform in any way we like. If marriage is something we receive, then we've got to deal with it one way. And that's kind of the symbol of secularism. Nothing anymore is a given. Nothing is boundaried. Nothing is objectively established, and we have to just receive it. Everything's there for us to deal with without any worry about what a creator may have intended.
It seems to me we've gone from a situation where, as secularism advanced, that melting iceberg, as you talked about it, the cat's cry became tolerance, and you ought to respect other people's view of truth as truth if that was true for them. If I had a different set of ideas, then that was true for me. We've moved beyond that. We now have an extraordinary return of authoritarianism, even of absolutism, and I think particularly of the critical theorists and the way in which they reject not only religion, but also the great ideologies, including Marxism, it seems, even though they're probably an offshoot of cultural Marxism. They reject reason, they reject science, they reject the Enlightenment, they reject everything and say we can build a new world order based on issues of sexuality, the sexualization of politics. How on earth can people see that as an adequate substitute for what we've given up?
Well, no one really consistently does, do they? So it reminds me of Richard Dawkins, the atheist, who said no one is a postmodernist at 33,000 feet. In other words, you deny objective reality in your college classroom, you reject it in your legal courtroom, you reject it in your protest on the street, but you're really counting on the fact that there are objective truths when you get on an airplane and it takes off, into the sky. I used to put it this way. The biggest problem of anyone who wants to correct an academic context is that you meet postmodernists who tell you that all language is indeterminate and there is no objective truth, and the author of the text is dead, so it's pure subjectivity, and thus you can't tell them what any text means, but they don't apply it to their contract. Now all of a sudden the rules have changed. So no one really wants a postmodern or a critical theory committed heart surgeon. And so what that points out is that there's a basic contradiction, a lack of consistency. And we've got to lean into that. We've got to show that, again, you have people saying that, and by the way, the critical theorists really following Marx's project of just ruthless criticism, as he called for, that is the destruction of everything. And he said, once that happens, nothing will remain. No God, no morality, no family, even, he said. Once you set that loose, there's no going back, but you can't let it control everything, because eventually even the postmodernists have to add 2 apples plus 2 apples and come up with 4 apples. So we've got some arguments that we've got to be making very clearly. And a part of what we have to do right now is show that if there is no objective truth, then we don't even know there's no objective truth.
Thank you for watching this episode. We appreciate your support. If you value vital conversations like this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel there, and also click the notification bell to stay up to date with new releases.